And here we are at the Borrhaave Rijksmuseum. So another one, second place of medical significance here in Leiden. And as always, let's begin with the anatomical theater. As always, I'm a bit late because I'm not very good at planning how much time I will spend getting from one place to the next. But here we are, and I still have 45 minutes before they close. The Borrhaave Rijksmuseum was very kind to provide me with a complimentary ticket after I asked them to record. And actually I consider myself quite fortunate because for being so late, there is no one else here. So I don't really have to worry about bothering the other people. So let me see if I can get the audio guides here, and then I will report more back to you. Okay, so first thing, the correct pronunciation is Borrhaave. So this is the Borrhaave Rijksmuseum. And this, I've just seen the presentation. One hint here, when you come, if you speak English, the English narration is up here. So on the top balcony. Now, first I was looking desperately down there to see if I could find the audio guide in English, but I could only find those in Dutch. So it's actually a different entrance. In fact, you get down there through that way, and you come here up through the stairs. So if you want to hear in English, it has to be up here. And the presentation takes about 7 minutes, I would say. And it starts, I think, everything every 15 minutes. So if one has already started, it's usually a good idea to wait for the next one. And so this is the original surgical and anatomical theater from the university, which was brought here. Oh, what a disappointment. I visited it thinking it was the real thing, the original one. It's actually, quote, an exact copy. Back then, for whichever reason, people were starting to do science, and it was seen perhaps as a bit exciting, I don't know. So a lot of people actually liked to watch it, and at the same time, of course, this is not a concern for anatomical dissections, but when you talk about surgery, at the same time, they do not have the same notions of asepsis we have today, of cleaning things and preventing infection. So I believe that most people do not see a problem in standing without a mask before someone open. Fortunately, I think this one was mostly used for anatomical research. And to some degree, there is something I think we've lost here, because we don't want to make a spectacle out of every surgery. But I'm a medical doctor, I went to medical school, and sometimes it was really hard to get a good view at the operating theater. When there were a lot of students, for example, and you couldn't quite see exactly what was being performed at surgery at. And so I would very much welcome to have something like this, perhaps not exactly in a modern presentation. And of course, they use the presentation anatomical theater as a general presentation to display the advancements in science, and they really encourage you to start with it. And you can call it a bug, you can call it a feature, but overall, I'd say that considering the anatomical theater is the face of the Borrhaave Museum, it's really what they put forward. I think it's kind of understandable that they turned it into a bit of a show and also use it to display astronomy and biology and other sciences as a whole. It became more of a place than just a piece in the museum. The anatomical theater, we have all these different pieces. The Borrhaave Rijksmuseum is dedicated to science in a general way. However, they have a pretty strong focus on medical science. So we can see a bit of chemistry, we can see a bit of astronomy naturally, But we can also see, for example, a large amount of surgical instruments.
And interspersed with all that, we have all these seemingly random objects. They do mention that dissections happen during winter, because that's how they pretty much prevented the bodies from rotting away too quickly. And that during the summer, quote, visitors admire objects from other countries and worlds unknown to them, end quote. So, are these examples of those objects? I have no idea. They did not say.
There's no description on it, but we have here an original anatomy book. It looks quite similar, albeit much smaller to the one we saw at the Griffin Museum. I guess this must have probably been used to treat some kind of kyphosis or scoliosis. These look like treatments for deformities of the bones and of the spine particularly. And the microscopes, which of course no science museum could do without, which contributes so much to the understanding, for example, of microorganisms. It's really a pity, and this I add as someone that's visiting the museum, I am pretty sure these are glass eyeballs that must have been used to perhaps... No, I think they aren't. I'm not really sure. Most of them look diseased, but are they replicas or are they real thing?
So, future Ricardo speaking here, I did some research, and it's actually a demonstration box for eye diseases from the first half of the 19th century. So, just as we saw with many models in the Delft, the Griffin Museum, in the same way, when people couldn't just look up on the internet how a disease looked like, this was used for teaching. So you had all these many glass eyes which depicting different kinds of diseases, and you could study by looking at how it appeared.
And this is exactly the point I was going to raise. As a visitor of the museum, there are no descriptions. It's extremely hard to understand what's actually being displayed. I'm a medical doctor, and I sometimes have a hard time identifying hello, good afternoon, some of the pieces. So perhaps that entrance there could do with a bit more of explanation. So here an image of black pearl. I'm here for medicine, but I'm not going to shy away from the other sciences. A theoretical concept that was predicted mathematically much earlier, I think perhaps by Albert Einstein, before it could actually have its existence proven. The proof is far later.
As I came to know later, this is actually the temporary exhibition, which was currently themed space when I was there, including the black holes. So, this museum is a bit labyrinthine. You don't enter to the ground floor. You enter to the anatomical theater, however, on the upper floor. Just in the same way, the upper floor is where you go to listen in English, you go on the ground floor, you go into the temporary exhibition. If you want to follow the correct sequence of exhibitions, you go to the upper floor. Part of the reason the layout is so confusing is that the Museum Boerhaave moved to a convent, the Nunnery of St. Cecilia, in 1991. So the building used to be a convent, and therefore it has a central courtyard and many hallways outlining the courtyard. So that strongly contributes to the confusion. But just go straight to the hallways and beware, you will always be turning right as you circle the courtyard.
I'm pretty sure this is meant for someone to lie down and watch what's happening here upwards. That sounds very much like it. After all, there is a projector near my head. And if I bring it here, a bit lower here, you can see it up. It's evidently about black holes, which is the theme of this room. And like I said, I was actually quite lucky to find the museum vastly empty.
There are some additional pieces in the space area, albeit I must say I rather question the relevancy of Escher paintings or a black hole themed dress? Regardless, also bear in mind that
De structuur van ruimte en tijd is nog steeds enorm vervormd.
So, unfortunately, another mention that must be made, the Anatomical Museum is the only room that has translations in English. So if you don't speak Dutch, you are unlikely to understand a spoken part of the other pieces.
and as soon as you manage to find your way out of the labyrinth and enter the proper exhibition, the museum is roughly arranged in chronological order. So we start with the 17th century pieces from the Dutch Golden Age. The first room is largely dominated by another of the symbols of the Berghaven Museum, which is the planetarium, also known as the Leiden Sphere, from circa 1670. It's allegedly the oldest heliocentric planetarium in the world. So this actually moves. Whether this was intended just as a piece of art or as something educational, I do not know. However, it would have been nice to see an actual working piece, even if it were just a replica, because it said here that it was placed at the University of Leiden in 1710 and worked and could be still working there for more than a century. Then, straight ahead of us, we have the book-shaped cabinet of the Pharmacists Guild of Den Haag from 1660, containing many simplicia or simples, raw components for the production of medicines, very much alike the one we already saw in Delft.
To the part I'm most familiar with.
Here we have illustrations from many different authors, some as early as 1517. However, what draws most our attention, right to the side, beneath his own image, the masterwork of Andries van Wessel or Andreas Vesalius, De Humani Corporis Fabrica Libris Septum. Vesalius shares his room with physics experiments, mostly involving vacuum, such as the Magdeburg hemispheres or also horizontal pumps. Andreas Vesalius is widely known as the father of modern anatomy because he is credited as being the first one to improve on many theories that had been unchanged ever since Clavius Galenos or Galen. Opposed on the table to Vesalius are the original anatomical specimens of Bernhard Siegfried Albinus, a student of Berghaven and Howard Bidlow, and later professor at Leiden himself. Besides the portrait of Cornelis Buckelman and Johannes Six, we have the image and work of Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, a common cloth manufacturer whose great development in lens-making technology was mostly towards being able to see the threads of his drapery, but who made significant advancements in microbiology, particularly after being introduced to the scientific community by fellow Delft citizen and physician Reinier de Graaf. He shares his side of the room with many prisms, as well as other objects, such as a pendulum apparatus from 1733, or the original planetarium Christian Huygens made for the French minister Colbert. This marks the end of the Golden Age hallway and turning right, the beginning of the next exposition. Right as we enter the Sickness and Health hallway, we are greeted on the left by a series of 4 oil paintings, the 4 guises of the physician, from the first quarter of the 1600s, the physician as Christ, the physician as angel, the physician as human being, and the physician as the devil, and on the right by a wooden room divider from 1648 depicting barber surgeon scenes. One of the favorites, a bloodletting, is represented by a shaving and or bloodletting bowl or basin. Yes, you actually heard that right, either one of those. And it rests amidst many other instruments, many of them from Albinus himself, many of them actually representing amputation tools, such as saws or knives.
And so this is what Suzy told us about the museum in Delft, that before there was like internet or illustrations, a lot of models were made out of resin or some kind of imitation like that.
Well, perhaps they weren't so wrong in making wax or resin model, considering wax and resin models tend not to malfunction as often as our modern technology. As it very often happens, these panels are interesting, so to speak, but I've been to more than a single museum with them, and they sometimes don't work.
Very early stethoscopes. Of course, the traditional one is not so different to what we use today. But who has never seen in a book one of these tube stethoscopes? The very primitive, the very earliest way. And of course, as we saw in Delft, people always like to use models to demonstrate childbirth, for example, and how it worked. We can see there's like a small doll here. Let me see from when this one is.
By the way, if you're curious about the stethoscopes we've just seen, the Weiss London binaural one is from between 1875 and 1925, and the Utrecht type, the mono-oral one, is from between 1830 and 1880.
So this piece is from 1650 to 1715. So you see that way before they had like animations or anything, they were already using these kinds of dolls, which to some degree we use until nowadays. I had many of them at my university here, for example. Many sorts of surgical instruments. What draws a lot of attention is that some of the scissors, for example, despite being very old, more than 100, 150 years old, are not that different from what you use nowadays. Of course, perhaps the... Pardon me?
So I decided to leave this here as a warning, because even though it doesn't matter that much to me right now, because I'm pretty much doing a voice over everything, so it doesn't interfere that much with my video, it's important to keep in mind the Dutch have a very particular way of seeing time, especially closing times. In many places around the world, when places say they close at 5 p.m. for example, it means you have until 5 p.m. to arrive, but as long as you get inside the building before 5 p.m., you can take as much time as you want within reason inside the building and finish whatever you have to do there. Not in the Netherlands. There, they actually expect you to be out of the building by the time the building closes. So, if they say it closes at 5 p.m., expect to leave the building before 5 p.m. Concluding the Sickness and Health walk, we end in a room with several models, including many embryological and obstetrical ones. What actually draws the most attention is that many of these models, including the model of a female human figure, the large one, and the series of pregnancy models displaying fetuses inside the uterus made by Dr. Louis Azul, a 19th century physician, were actually made in papier-mâché, not in wax or plaster as was common at the time. In contrast, we also have heart embryology models from a similar time, now made in wax. Upon descending the stairs to the next room, we start seeing some newer medical equipment. Most eye-catching of all is the first artificial kidney, that is, the first hemodialysis machine, created by Willem Kolff, a Leiden citizen, in the middle of the Second World War. The painting of Herman Boerhaave, which is wife Maria Drolenvaux and his daughter Johanna by Urde Helder from 1722, welcomes us to the great collections, an area of the museum dedicated to sciences in general. Here you'll find an assortment of weird and exquisite measuring devices, such as this hydrostatic balance from the 1700s, to standard measurements of volume and weight in the metric system, as well as many strange pieces of art. Amidst all, this curious engraving by Jan van der Laar for one of Albinus' books from 1747. The Havre puzzlingly shares the same room as the development of telescopes. However, out of the telescope room, astronomy gives way to natural sciences as we gaze upon a vast collection of animal specimens. Amidst the specimens, an oil painting reveals another of Boerhaave's students, Carl Linnaeus, a famous Swedish biologist and physician known as the father of taxonomy. In the great collections, many different objects from batteries to cabinets of microscope specimens to solar microscopes quickly give way to each other until the very last room, the Zellenberg collection, which displays items such as a pendulum clock from 1675 or Francis Hauksbee vacuum pump, thus ending this part of the museum. A model of a drainage mill from 1742 welcomes us to water, electricity and data, the engineering portion of the museum, as it couldn't be otherwise.
And I believe, since we are in the Netherlands, this part must be especially dedicated to dealing with water, irrigation and draining.
Besides the Zeeland maps from the 1600s and many designs of steam engines, we also have a lot on telephones and telegraphs, as well as experiments such as the voltaic pile by Alessandro Volta, the creator of the battery in the 1800s. This is a short exposition, and the final items, now closer to us in time, a primitive television from the 1930s, a 1940s homemade antenna, and a 1965 computer serve as a prelude to the next room. The last permanent exhibition, shortest of them all, named Big Questions, tries to link the scientific developments of the past to our present times by displaying and showcasing still ongoing areas of research. This dead-end room includes items such as a COVID-19 vaccine, a giant COVID-19 glass sculpture, artificial pancreas and implantable cardioverter defibrillators, a rock from the moon gathered during the Apollo 11 moon flight in 1969, gifted by Richard Nixon to the Netherlands, and a 1:10 model of the James Webb Telescope, launched into space in 2022. I had no idea what Outhang meant, but since there is a closed door, I guess it's not this way.
Is the exit that way? Okay, this is a dead end. This is a dead end. That.
I mean, there's another one in the corner there, but whatever you want.
Which one is the right one?
It's the downstairs.
This
by
one?
the entrance. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, to this moment, I have no idea whether I took the right path there. But as I later came to realize, I had actually descended into the family exhibition Playing with Mathematics, which was naturally completely empty and was indeed at least one of the possible exits of the museum. If there's some advice I could give to the museum, the most important piece would probably be to make the maps clearer. I think actually making a 3D map of the museum showing the ground floor and the upper floor in relation to each other would go a great way into making things simple. Or just draw some arrows on the floor with "go this way" written, for example. Eventually, in a desperate attempt to make it out of the museum and not be permanently entombed there, I eventually made my way in the wrong direction to the trophy cabinet and even to the entrance of the conference room. I noticed I was on the wrong side of the museum, albeit now on the ground floor, and backtracked until I managed to get back into the reception area.
So this is the entrance to the museum. I did not get to film it before, and I'm going to show the facade. Since I came here and started recording, bye, because after all, the museum closes, but the facade doesn't. So I started recording the facade. And I'm probably going to get my microphone because walking on the streets tend to be quite noisy. So I'm not sure whether you understand me, but here we are at Leiden, and this is the Boerhaave Museum. So I'll share my thoughts on the Boerhaave Museum on the next video, since I'm already going to be walking through Leiden. So let's move this part to the next video. It looks really late, doesn't it? Almost like I'm filming late at night. It's actually like 5 p.m. It is slightly later than 5 p.m. But in winter, the sun has been setting really early. So like 4:30, there's already no more sun. And like 5 p.m., it's already dark like this. I wish I could get more light to show my face, but at least you can hear what I'm talking, and hopefully I'm walking in the right direction, because I'm pretty sure you noticed by now, I'm not perhaps the best navigator ever. So, regarding the Boerhaave Museum, it's a very traditional museum. There isn't a lot of interactivity concerning it. So, it's not a place where you'll get, for example, many videos or many displays or simulations or anything like this. It's a very traditional museum where you have like the pieces and you could look at them. So if you are extremely interested already in Leiden, then maybe it's interesting to pay it a visit, but I will definitely not recommend coming specifically for it. But what really brings it home is the fact that I really think they could benefit from a guided tour. Because it's exactly when you don't have a guide that you feel the limitations of a traditional tour. Of course, I know how to read. Most of the descriptions are also in English, so you can find out what it means.
But it's never as fun as a truly immersive experience, even if it's pretty.
Beautiful night. Which way for the train station? Does it say Museum Boerhaave? Okay, so it's actually at the... I think I'm going to have to stop the recording just to look at the place. Okay, so I think I'm going the right direction. It should be across the bridge. And answer to my previous question of whether every Dutch city has canals, I think the answer is yes. Because truth be told, despite all the museums